Hello and welcome to the Mariposa Wrap Skort Sew Along. In this tutorial, I'll be walking you through each of the steps and sharing some tips along the way to help you get a clean, beautiful finish. Mariposa is designed to be comfortable, adjustable, and easy to wear. It features built-in shorts, an elasticated back waistband, French seams throughout, and a Hong Kong binding on the front waistband for a polished, finished, inside and out look. No serger needed. This pattern works best in lightweight fabrics with movement like viscose, rayon challis, tencel, crepe, linen, or linen blends. Fabrics with softer drape will really highlight the movement and shape of the wrap. There are two different views included in the pattern. View A, which is the classic wrap skort, and View B, which is just the shorts. For the size chart and all the fabric requirements, please refer to the booklet that comes with your pattern. In addition to your thread, you'll also need 1.5 or 4 centimeter wide elastic, medium to heavyweight fusible interfacing, and 1.5 or 4 centimeter wide bias tape. But this is optional. If you want to use your serger for this part, you can skip it. Make sure to pre-wash your fabric. It makes a huge difference. Iron it and then cut out all your pieces. Once you have it all ready, it's time to start. So let's get started. The first step is to sew the darts on the front of your shorts. I like to mark the dart completely and draw the lines with the ruler just so that I know where to sew and they end up perfect. I think when you're using lightweight fabrics, they easily shift and they can stretch a little bit. So make sure you pin them as you go along in the instructions so that they don't move at all, and then your seams align perfectly. Once you get to the end of your dart, you don't want to backstitch so that it doesn't create any bulk. You cut off your threads, you make sure you have enough to tie a little knot. So you do one, and then you do it again. And then that will secure. It's a little bit hard to do with long nails, but there we go. You do a little knot, and then that will reduce the bulk. Then you're going to take your pieces and you're going to iron that dart towards the side seam. And because we tied the knot, your dart at the front is going to be completely flat, which is super nice. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to prep our back piece for the shorts. If you're making View A, which is the complete skort, you're going to have to trim 1 centimeter off the top of the back of the shorts. If you're making View B, which is just the shorts, you don't need to trim it. That's just an extra seam allowance that you would need to attach the back facing. But because we are making this skort, we don't need it. So we're going to have to trim it. Okay, so now we're going to assemble the legs. So you're going to take your back piece and your front piece and you're going to put them wrong sides together. We are doing this because we're using French seams because we're not going to use our serger for this project. So first we start by layering wrong sides together, front piece and back piece. And then you're going to use a 1/4 seam allowance and then we're going to trim it. So I'll show you how. Okay, so we just finished our seam, 1/4 inch, and now you're going to trim it. So you want a really sharp pair of scissors and make sure that there's nothing behind, and you're going to trim that seam allowance in half. Then you're going to take it over to your ironing board and you're going to open that seam up and iron it flat, and that will make it easier to turn it. And this is just a side note to let you know how much the fabric can shift. I didn't pin this obviously, but I was holding it and I thought I was holding it right. But just so you know, and you can see that it does happen. So you have to be really careful with light fabrics. So next, you're going to flip your shorts right sides together and you're going to repeat that seam, and that's going to encase the raw edge that you just sewed. and you do that for both sides. So now that we've done that, we're going to iron that seam one towards the back and then the other one towards the front, and that's going to help us minimize the bulk. The next step is we're going to sew the crotch. So you're going to place both sides, wrong sides together again, and we're going to repeat the same process. We're going to do 1/4 of an inch seam all along the crotch. When I'm working with lightweight fabrics and I have a crotch line like this, I like to start in the inner leg seam and then work my way one way and then stop and then go back to the center seam and go the other way. And that just helps me keep the fabric together and prevent it from stretching or shifting. And it just makes it easier, and I find it a lot less complicated to align the center seam. So now I did this part, and then I'm going to work my way back, start again from the center inner leg seam, and then finish the other side. So now we're going to trim that seam we just made in half. Now that we have our seam all pressed and ready, we're going to do the final 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all around, and that will encase the raw edge. So here are the shorts so far. They're attached except for the side seam. So the next step is to attach the front facing to the front of the shorts. If you haven't done so already, you should have your facing already interfaced and ready to go. And this is not going to be a French seam, so we're going to do the normal way, which is right sides together, and you're going to do the narrower curve side up. So if you can picture it like a smiley face, that's the way to go. And then we're just going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I like to pin my facings because they always seem to shift on me. So I mark the center front, and then I pinned it with the front seam, and then I'm just going to pin the sides and then sew it together. Now you're going to press the facing up towards the seam allowance, and you're going to understitch 1/8 of an inch, and that will keep it in place. So now we're going to do the side seams. The back of the shorts don't have a facing, so it's going to end up aligning with the seam of the front facing you just made. So all you have to do is pin the sides from that point to the bottom hem, and you're going to do a French seam again. So 1/4 of an inch, then you're going to trim it and iron it, and then you're going to flip it inside out and then sew it again. So here's one side finished. Make sure that you're, of course, aligning your notches and that you're still able to see the first notch on the back of the shorts. You're going to need to reference this notch later. And then you're going to continue your seam line all the way to the front facing, so all the way to the top. And that's going to serve as a guide for when you flip it. After you sew the seam and you get to the trimming stage, you're going to start trimming after the facing. So you're going to leave this little bit untrimmed, and then you're going to trim from here all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so now we're gonna iron it, and I have a little tiny ironing board here, which is great for sleeves and legs. So what we're gonna do is you're gonna take that seam and you're gonna iron it to the front. And you're gonna catch this front facing bit and you're gonna iron along that seam you made. Okay, that's all ready. And then you're gonna sew it as normal. You're gonna flip it inside out. And you're gonna sew that French seam. And you're gonna catch this little tiny bit from the facing. So you're gonna start sewing from the top, catching this bit all down the side. So here are your shorts with the attached facing here at the top, and then you're going to iron that side seam that you just did towards the back. Now we're going to do the bottom hem, and to do this we're going to fold in 1/4 of an inch and then again 1/4 of an inch, and then you're going to edge stitch all the way around, and that will give you a nice clean seam. Okay, so here are the completed shorts. The bottom hem is all done. The inside is nice and clean. Oh, I love French seams. Now we're going to work on the ties, and you have 2 ties, one long tie and then a shorter one. With the wrong sides facing up, you're going to make the long tie pointy end point to the left, and then the short tie pointy end pointing to the right. And that will help you attach them to the right panels when we get there. Then we're gonna finish the bottom side only. So you're gonna take your ties, you're gonna fold up the bottom 1/4 of an inch, and then you're gonna fold it in again another 1/4 of an inch, and you're gonna iron that, and you're gonna edge stitch all the way from one side to the other side, so just the bottom. If your fabric is super light and really slippery, you may want to stitch the 1/4 seam along the bottom to help you fold it up. It'll just make it more accurate, but I'm just gonna wing it just because I don't really care if it's like super accurate at the bottom here. And generally I'm pretty good with pressing. So once this is done, you're going to fold it in again and then edge stitch. Now you're going to take your large skirt front panel and you're going to take your long tie and we're going to attach them together. So position them right at the top corner, and you're going to sew 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from the top to the end of the tie. Now you're going to trim that seam you just made. So just that bit. Like that. Then you're going to open up your panel and your tie. And you're going to fold the curved edge in 1/4 of an inch all the way around to the bottom and to the top, and you're going to catch the seam you just made. So everything goes to the wrong side, 1/4 of an inch, and then you're going to fold it in again 1/4 of an inch. When I'm pressing a curved pattern piece, I like to lift the iron instead of dragging it so that my fabric doesn't shift and it doesn't stretch, and I find it so much easier. When you get to the tie, you're going to fold it in like this, so that you can continue your fold. Next, you're gonna edge stitch that fold that you just made, and for this you're gonna start stitching at that seam line from the tie and the panel. So from the top all the way down, you're gonna merge into that fold that you just made and go all the way around your panel. I find it easier to start my sewing from the curved edge. I find that it drags the fabric less and you can get a cleaner curve that way. Now you're going to go back to the ironing board and make sure you iron all the seams as you go. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, most of the time, thinner fabrics will wrinkle and pucker up as you're working on them. So just make sure that you're giving everything a press. Or you can just leave it till the end. It's personal preference, but I like to do it as I go. When you get to the part right here where you join the tie and the panel, you're going to fold that seam towards the tie. You're going to give that a press. And then what you're going to do to keep it down in place is you're going to edge stitch from here to here, and that'll secure that little flap. Okay, and here's what that seam looks like. I've sewn it down and now it's flattened. So your front large panel is complete. You want to do the same steps for the little tie and then the other small skirt front panel. Next, we're going to attach the whole wrap together. So you're going to take the left panel, which is a large one, and you're going to line it up to the fold line on the back of the skirt. So if you haven't done so already, fold it in, press it, and that's just a fold line. This is not a cut line. And you're going to line up the edge of your panel to that fold line. You're going to line up your notch, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way to the bottom. And the bottom edge will be longer, and that's just because later on we're going to fold it up and finish it also. Okay, so here's the first side panel attached, and we're going to follow the same thing that we did with the waist facing. We're going to trim from this seam, so basically the side panel seam, all the way to the bottom before you get to the extra bit of fabric here. And that's because later on that's going to also serve as a guide when we sew down the seam, but for now just trim from here all the way to the top. So this is my panel so far. I trimmed that seam and then I pressed it. I pressed the panel towards the inside of the skirt, and this is the bottom. I used that stitch line as a guide, folded it in just like we did at the waist, and this is the top, and this is your fold line. Now you're going to stitch it from the top all the way down to the bottom. You're going to catch that little edge and you're going to go all the way down. Okay, so I've attached the first side panel, and once I did the second pass on that French seam, I pressed it towards the back of the skirt. So make sure you're not losing that fold line. So as you're pressing your seams, repress that fold line so that you keep it. And then you're going to do the same on the other side for the other panel. So the last thing to do to finish the skirt wrap is to finish the bottom hem of the back skirt panel. So remember how we had that extra fabric there? We're going to finish that off by folding it 1/4 inch and then 1/4 of an inch again, and that will make that seam meet up with the side skirt panel. So you're going to do that all along the back, and then you're going to edge stitch. Okay, so we've arrived to the trickiest part of this project. We are going to attach the shorts to the skirt panel. And to do that, you're going to make sure that your shorts are right side up so that your facing's right side up and your panel is right side down. So first of all, you're going to make sure that both your side panels are tucked in. That makes sure that when you attach them together, they are sandwiched in between. So you're going to fold this side in and then the other side in. So it should look like this. So you're going to pin that together and you're going to make sure that the back panel, that fold that you made, aligns with the facing seam. So this is together, still making sure that your side panel is folded in, so it's sandwiched, and you're going to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance from the top to that first notch on the back of the shorts. So in case it got erased or you forgot to mark it, this first notch is 2 inches down from the back of the shorts. So the top of the shorts down 2 inches, that's where that notch is. And so you're going to sew from there to the top. So now that it's sewn together from the top down to that notch, when you open it up, this is the front of the shorts that are now attached to the back of the skirt, and this is the side panel. You see where that notch stops there. So I'm only catching that seam and not the rest. You're going to repeat that on the other side. Okay, so now the sides are connected, and this is the back of the shorts, and here's your wrap. And now what you're going to do is you're going to take your wrap and you're going to flip it to the back. And now you'll see that everything is connected on the side. So here's another view. Once you've flipped the skirt panel to the back, here are the shorts, and here is your wrap. So right now, if you open it up, oh, it went all the way down. The back of the shorts, which don't have a facing, will line up to that fold on the back skirt panel that you made earlier. And so later on, this is actually going to be folded down and sandwiched that, and that's going to become your casing for your elastic. But for right now, we're going to finish this raw edge all around the waist. You can either use your serger here, or you can use the Hong Kong bias tape method, which is a nice way to finish it. There are so many methods out there to cut your bias tape, so I'm not going to go over that in the video, but I do have a guide in the instructions in the booklet that comes with your pattern. So obviously it has to be cut on the bias in an angle so that you get that stretch. And the first thing you're going to do, you're going to fold it in half and iron it. And once you do that, you're going to iron just one side of the tape to meet that middle fold. Because we're using the Hong Kong method, we don't necessarily need both sides. You could do it, but I don't, just because it's easier. So if you have a bias tape maker that you want to use, you can certainly do that. I find it easier just to have the one side folded. I actually love making bias tape. I find it very relaxing, so I usually have some on hand just because, you never know when you need it. So once you've folded in the top edge to the middle, you're going to give it another press just so that it's nice and flat. If you're wondering, how much do I need? You should look at the finished measurements of the size that you're making, and that will give you an estimate of how much you need to go around the whole waist of your skirts. I usually add a couple inches just because you never know, and to account for the seam allowance when you join it together. Once you have your bias tape all pressed and ready to go, you're going to unfold it and you're going to take that edge with the double fold and you're going to align it to the edge of the waistband. I like to do it starting at the center front, and then you're going to leave about an inch unstitched so that you can join it to the other end once you go all the way around. So take this edge, you pin it, and then you go all the way around, and then you sew following that first fold. Once you've gotten all around the waistband, the easiest way to join is to take that side that you left the inch or half an inch unstitched. You're going to fold your shorts. For me, it happened to be that center seam because that's an easier reference point. You're going to fold it right where the stitching stops, and then you're going to put the other side, the rest of the bias tape together. And to join them, all you have to do is stitch right down that line. So, but you got to make sure you're not catching your shorts. You're just sewing just shy of that center seam. Okay, so here's that seam. You're going to flip it and make sure you didn't catch the front seam of your shorts. And now your bias tape is joined together. Next, you're going to trim it. That's the excess. And then you're going to open it up and iron that seam flat. The last thing to do is to finish sewing that part of the bias tape together, and then it'll be all attached to your shorts. Now that you've attached your bias tape to your shorts, you're going to flip it up towards the seam allowance, and then you're going to flip it back towards the wrong side, and that's going to encase that seam allowance that you made. And the last thing to do to make it all pretty is to stitch in the ditch all around. The next step is to complete the waistband so we can insert our elastic. But to do that, we have to take the back of the shorts, that raw edge, up to meet that fold. So because I'm using light slippery fabric, I think I'm going to baste it in place just so that it doesn't move on me before the next step. So now that I basted the back of the shorts to the back of the skirt panel, I'm going to fold over the waistband and I'm going to stitch in the ditch following the bias tape line from the side panel to the other side panel, and that's going to make the casing for the elastic. Okay, so I've now secured down the back skirt panel. I folded it over, stitched in the ditch, only from side seam to side seam. The front of the skirt, that waist facing, is still loose. So to secure that, you're going to fold it in. You're going to stitch in the ditch following the center seam and then the darts. And now you can also take out that basting stitch that you made earlier. Okay, so now that the waistband is all sewn down, we're going to insert the elastic through the back, and we're going to do this through one of the side seams. So you're going to take it and you're going to thread it all the way to the other side. Here we go. And if you don't know, these are called hemostats. I posted about them on Instagram. Everybody went crazy over them. They didn't know what they were. I use them all the time. I highly recommend getting a pair. They're so handy. So now that the elastic is through, you're going to sew in the ditch on that side seam just to catch this end and it doesn't shift. Okay, so I've stitched that down and I'm making sure that my elastic is not twisted or bunching up in the back. Always try this on. You just never know how you're gonna like the fit. You don't know if the elastic is stretching as much as you'd like. You can always add. If I find that I'm short, I usually stitch a bit of extra elastic. You don't see that anyways, but always try it on. Use a safety pin on the other end to secure that, and then try it on, because you just never know. Once you're happy with the fit, just stitch in the ditch again, and that'll be your finished skort. You can also, depending on your fabric, do a horizontal stitch along the back. Make sure you're stretching everything as you pass it through your sewing machine. And this is pretty much it. You've finished your skort. And that's it. Your skort is complete. Thank you so much for following along. I hope that all these steps were clear to you. And if you make it, please tag me. I would love to see it. Thank you. Bye.